The night was unusually cold for October, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you question every decision that led you to this moment. Jessica Morgan, a 23-year-old freelance photographer, sat in her dimly lit apartment, scrolling through Craigslist on her laptop. She had been searching for an antique camera for weeks, something with character, something that could tell stories before she even loaded the film. Her eyes caught an ad posted just 12 minutes ago. Antique camera, cheap price, must pick up tonight, serious inquiries only. The price was unbelievably low, almost too good to be true. The seller had a 5-star rating from 14 past sales, with comments like fast response and polite and professional. But something about the ad felt off. No seller name, just a burner email and an address on the outskirts of town, a place where the streetlights gave up and the asphalt crumbled into gravel. Jessica hesitated, her finger hovering over the trackpad. She glanced at the clock, 1:47 a.m. Her roommate Claire had been asleep since 9 p.m., her door firmly shut. Jessica bit her lip, then typed out a quick text, checking out a camera, back by 3. If I'm late, send cops to this address. She attached the address from the Craigslist ad and hit send. Claire didn't reply, but Jessica told herself it was fine. She was just being paranoid. Still, as she grabbed her keys and headed out the door, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "This is a bad idea." The drive took 40 minutes, the city lights fading into a dense, oppressive darkness. Pine Hollow Road was a snake of dirt winding through skeletal oaks, their branches clawing at her dented Honda like gnarled fingers. No porch lights, no cars, just a crooked mailbox with 67 spray painted in red. The house hunched behind it, a 2-story Victorian with boarded windows, paint peeling like sunburned skin. Jessica killed the engine and sat for a moment, her breath fogging the windshield. Her phone showed no signal. The cold seeped in as she stepped out, leaves crunching like bone shards under her boots. A shadow moved behind the front door's frosted glass. The door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He looked ordinary, mid-40s, receding hairline, wearing a frayed cardigan. "Jessica?" His voice was buttered toast, warm and inviting. "I'm Robert. Come in. It's freezing." She forced a smile and followed him inside, the hallway smelling of mothballs and something sweet beneath, like rotting fruit. Robert gestured to a love seat in the parlor. "I'll get the camera. Coffee?" She declined, her eyes darting around the room. The floral wallpaper bubbled with damp. A grandfather clock ticked arrhythmically. And there, behind the armchair, a smeared handprint on the baseboard, rust-colored. Robert disappeared upstairs, his footsteps heavy on the creaking wood. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at the door, then back at the staircase. The room felt wrong, like it was alive, watching her. She heard a faint banging, muffled but insistent, coming from a room down the hall. The door was slightly ajar. Against her better judgment, she stood and crept toward it, her boots silent on the worn carpet. She pushed the door open. A naked bulb swung, casting jagged shadows. The walls were plastered with photos, women, dozens of them, all young, all dark-haired like her. Newspaper clippings, local student missing since 2019, remains found in State Park. A workbench held tools, pliers, a hacksaw, a Polaroid camera, and in the corner, a metal cage. The source of the banging. A woman inside, chained, her eyes wide with terror. She mouthed the words, "Help me." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled back, her mind racing. She had to get out, now. But as she turned, Robert was there, blocking the doorway. His smile was gone, replaced by a cold, empty stare. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said, his voice flat. Jessica's instincts kicked in. She grabbed a rusty screwdriver from the workbench and lunged at him, catching him off guard. He grunted as the tool grazed his arm, and she bolted past him, down the hall, toward the front door. But the door was locked. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her hands shaking. Behind her, Robert's footsteps grew louder. She yanked the door open and sprinted into the night, the cold air biting her face. Her car was only 20 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. She heard him behind her, his breathing ragged. She dove into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it just as he reached the car. He pounded on the window, his face twisted in rage. "You're not leaving," he screamed. Jessica turned the key, but the engine sputtered and died. "No, no, no," she whispered, turning it again. This time the engine roared to life. She slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the gravel. Robert jumped back as she peeled out, the car fishtailing as she sped down the dirt road. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Her hands gripped the wheel, her knuckles white. The road seemed endless, the trees closing in on either side. She glanced at her phone, still no signal. She had to get to the main road. She had to find help. But then headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. Robert's truck. He was gaining on her. Jessica's heart raced. She pressed the gas pedal to the floor, the car lurching forward. The truck was right behind her now, its high beams blinding. She swerved, trying to shake him, but he stayed on her tail. The road curved sharply, and she took the turn too fast, the car skidding off the road and into the trees. The airbag deployed, slamming into her chest. Dazed, she fumbled with the seatbelt, her vision blurry. The truck stopped behind her, its engine idling. Jessica stumbled out of the car, her legs wobbly. She had to run. She had to hide. She plunged into the woods, the branches tearing at her clothes. The moon was her only light, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps crunching on the leaves. "Jessica," he called, his voice sing-song, taunting. "You can't run forever." She ducked behind a tree, her chest heaving. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to silence her breathing. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped. She could see his shadow just a few feet away. He was listening, waiting. She closed her eyes, praying he wouldn't find her. Then a twig snapped. She froze. He was right there. She could smell him, sweat and something metallic. Blood. "Found you," he whispered. Jessica screamed and bolted, running blindly through the trees. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness swallowing her whole. She tripped over a root, falling hard onto the ground. Pain shot through her ankle, but she forced herself up, limping forward. She could see lights ahead, a house. She ran toward it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She pounded on the door, screaming for help, but no one answered. The house was dark, abandoned. Robert's laughter echoed behind her. "No one's coming to save you, Jessica." She turned, backing away from him. Her back hit the wall of the house, and she slid down, sobbing. He stood over her, a knife glinting in his hand. "You should have just bought the camera," he said, his voice almost sad. "Now look where we are." But then, sirens. Distant at first, then growing louder. Robert's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "No," he whispered. He turned and ran, disappearing into the woods. Jessica collapsed, her body shaking with relief. The police cars screeched to a halt, their lights flooding the yard. Officers jumped out, guns drawn. "Jessica Morgan?" one of them called. "Here!" she croaked, her voice barely audible. They rushed to her, wrapping her in a blanket and helping her to her feet. "Your friend called us," the officer said. "She said you might be in trouble." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He's still out there," she said, pointing to the woods. "He's got a woman, in a cage." The officers radioed for backup, then headed into the woods, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jessica sat in the back of a patrol car, watching as they searched. It felt like hours before they emerged, leading Robert in handcuffs. Behind them, paramedics carried the woman from the cage, her face pale but alive. Jessica closed her eyes, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. As Jessica sat in the hospital waiting room, wrapped in a thin blanket and clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee, an officer approached her with an update. The woman from the cage had been identified as Sarah Collins, a 21-year-old college student who had gone missing 2 years ago. She had been lured by a similar Craigslist ad, just like Jessica, and had been held captive ever since. Sarah had endured unimaginable horrors, forced to pose for Robert's sickening photo collection, starved and tortured. The officer's voice trembled as he explained that Robert had been using the antique camera as bait for years, targeting young women who fit his type. Jessica's stomach churned as she realized how close she had come to sharing Sarah's fate. The thought of what could have happened, the cage, the tools on the workbench, the Polaroid camera, sent a shiver down her spine. She stared at her hands, still trembling, and wondered if she'd ever feel safe again. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale of survival and the darkness that lurks behind seemingly innocent opportunities, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Remember, the world can be a dangerous place, and sometimes the most ordinary decisions can lead to the most extraordinary horrors. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and always trust your instincts. Until next time, keep the lights on and sleep with one eye open.